They cuffed a royal guard, then a colonel taught them a lesson. The streets were already bustling with visitors, tourists, and locals who had come to witness the daily rituals and the disciplined precision of the guards. Flags fluttered gently in the breeze, and the golden gates gleamed under the soft light of the rising sun. There was a sense of tradition in the air, a feeling that each person walking past the palace steps was part of something larger than themselves, even if only as an observer. Among the crowd that morning, a group of young security trainees had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine drill. These trainees were still in the early stages of their training and were eager to prove themselves. Their uniforms were neat, their shoes shined to perfection, and each carried the seriousness of someone determined to uphold the law. They were taught the importance of vigilance, to be alert at all times, and to act decisively whenever they saw something unusual. What they were not yet fully trained in was patience or understanding the delicate balance between authority and respect, especially in the presence of the palace's ceremonial guards. The young trainees were watching closely as the royal guards performed their ceremonial duties. Every movement was precise. The turn of a head, the lift of a foot, the way the rifles were held and marched. The guards had been trained for years, and their discipline was nearly flawless. Their expressions were calm, their posture rigid but elegant, a living example of tradition and unwavering duty. For a civilian, it was almost mesmerizing, but for the trainees, it was a challenge. They wanted to test their own skills to ensure they could recognize and respond to any threat. It started innocently enough. One of the trainees, a young man named Alex, noticed a guard who seemed slightly distracted. Perhaps the morning sun glinted in his eyes, or maybe he had briefly glanced toward the crowd. Alex's heart raced. In his mind, any lapse could be dangerous, and he imagined himself stepping in as a hero, preventing a possible threat to the palace. He signaled to his fellow trainees, whispering, "Look, that guard isn't paying attention. We need to act." The group hesitated for a moment, glancing at each other. None of them had ever made a decision like this in a real-world scenario. Their training had been mostly theoretical, based on drills and controlled exercises. But now, standing in front of a live guard, with the crowd watching, the stakes felt much higher. Nervous energy filled the small circle of trainees, and what began as caution quickly turned into impulsive action. Without consulting a senior officer, they moved forward, determined to show initiative. In the midst of the hustle and bustle, the guard had been performing his routine steps along the palace courtyard, maintaining a perfect rhythm. Suddenly, a trainee reached out and grabbed the guard's arm. Shocked, the guard froze. The young trainee quickly applied handcuffs, unsure if this was the correct action but believing he was acting to protect the palace. The crowd gasped, whispers spread like wildfire. "What is happening? Why are they handcuffing the guard?" Eyes widened as more trainees joined, surrounding the guard, trying to secure the situation. The royal guard, however, remained calm. He did not struggle, did not raise his voice, and did not allow panic to overtake him. Years of training had instilled in him a discipline that no sudden surprise could shake. Though handcuffed by inexperienced trainees, he held himself with dignity, his eyes steady and composed, scanning the surrounding area with a quiet authority. There was no anger, no panic, only the quiet presence of a person who knew his duty and his value to tradition. The contrast between the panic of the trainees and the guard's calm composure was striking. Meanwhile, the onlookers were a mixture of confused tourists, concerned citizens, and other guards who had noticed the unusual activity. Cameras flashed, not because anyone wanted to capture a moment of heroism, but because the scene was unexpected, almost unbelievable. People murmured, some asking questions, others simply watching in awe. It was not every day that a royal guard, a symbol of centuries of tradition and honor, could be seen handcuffed in the middle of a public street. Some visitors instinctively moved closer, curious about the explanation, while others stepped back, wary of any escalation. Among the trainees, confusion began to set in. What had started as an attempt to assert authority quickly turned into a tense and uncertain moment. Alex's mind raced. Did we overstep? Are we in trouble? He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His hands, still gripping the cuffs, trembled slightly. His colleagues exchanged worried glances, realizing for the first time that their lack of experience might have consequences far beyond what they had imagined. The realization began to sink in. They were no longer just trainees practicing in a controlled environment. They were part of a real incident that could have serious repercussions. Despite the trainees' nervousness, the Royal Guard maintained his composure. He did not speak harshly, did not shout, and did not allow fear to show on his face. His presence alone conveyed a quiet authority that seemed to calm the situation gradually. People in the crowd began to notice the stark difference between the inexperienced reactions of the young trainees and the unwavering steadiness of the guard. It was a lesson in itself. Experience and discipline often outweigh fear and impulsiveness. Eventually, a senior officer arrived on the scene. The officer, a veteran of many years of palace security, quickly assessed the situation. His face was stern, and his voice carried a calm authority that immediately drew attention. "Step back, trainees," he said firmly, motioning them to release the guard. With careful hands, he removed the handcuffs and ensured the guard was free. The trainees complied, their movements hesitant and apologetic. Their faces were red with embarrassment, their earlier confidence replaced with humility. The guard, now free, gave a slight nod to the senior officer and then to the trainees. It was not a nod of anger or reprimand, but one of acknowledgement that they had acted, albeit incorrectly, and that they would now learn the consequences of their actions. He returned to his position, resuming his ceremonial duties as if nothing had happened, a silent reminder of the discipline required to hold such a role. The contrast was even more apparent now. The trainees, nervous and uncertain, and the guard, calm and composed, embodying the ideals of duty and respect. For Alex and the others, the incident was overwhelming. They had imagined themselves heroes, acting decisively to protect the palace, but in reality, they had overstepped boundaries they did not fully understand. The morning sun continued to shine, the crowd slowly dispersed, and life around the palace continued as usual. But for the young trainees, nothing would feel the same again. They had witnessed the true weight of responsibility and the importance of discipline in the presence of those who had dedicated their lives to service. As they stood there, reflecting on the incident, Alex realized something profound. The act of handcuffing the guard had not been heroic. It had been a mistake born out of ignorance and inexperience. True heroism, he began to understand, was not about bold actions in the heat of the moment, but about understanding one's role, respecting those who had come before, and acting with both courage and wisdom. The lesson was already beginning to take root, even if the trainees could not yet fully articulate it. By the time the morning routine was over, the trainees were called aside by the senior officer for a formal debrief. They would later learn that their actions, while not malicious, had serious implications, and that understanding protocol was as important as executing it. The Royal Guard, meanwhile, returned to his duties with the quiet grace of someone who had seen many such incidents over the years, unshaken and unbothered, a living embodiment of tradition, discipline, and calm authority. The incident would be remembered not as a failure, but as a lesson, a reminder that authority must be tempered with respect, and that the path to true competence is paved with patience, observation, and humility. For Alex and his fellow trainees, the morning that began with confusion and impulsive action ended with a newfound appreciation for the roles they aspired to fulfill, and a deep understanding that mistakes, if approached with honesty and reflection, can become the most valuable. Teachers of all, after the morning incident at the royal palace, the young trainees could hardly concentrate on anything else. The memory of handcuffing the royal guard haunted them like a persistent shadow. Each one of them replayed the scene in their mind, analyzing every decision, every gesture, and every moment when things had gone wrong. What had seemed like a simple exercise in vigilance had turned into a serious lesson on responsibility, respect, and discipline. The trainees returned to their headquarters, a stately building with tall windows, polished floors, and walls lined with plaques commemorating years of service. The hallways, usually bustling with energetic chatter and laughter, felt unusually quiet that day. Everyone seemed aware that something important had happened outside the palace gates. Alex, still feeling the weight of embarrassment, walked alongside his fellow trainees in silence. Their steps were hesitant, as if the floor itself reminded them of the morning's mistake. Inside the briefing room, the trainees were summoned to sit in front of the senior officer who had intervened. The room had a serious atmosphere. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wood table. The officer, a man whose presence commanded both respect and a hint of fear, entered quietly. His uniform was immaculate, adorned with medals that spoke of years of courage and dedication. He took a seat at the head of the table, his eyes scanning the room with a calm but penetrating gaze. "Sit," he commanded simply. The word was soft, yet it carried authority. The trainees quickly found their places, their hands folded nervously on their laps. Alex could feel the sweat forming at the back of his neck. Each trainee's mind was racing, wondering what the officer would say, what punishment might follow, and how badly their mistake had affected their careers. The officer leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "This morning," he began, his voice steady, "we witnessed an incident that could have had serious consequences." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I want each of you to tell me what happened, and more importantly, why it happened." Alex swallowed hard. He felt the lump in his throat, knowing that honesty was their only option. He spoke first, recounting the events in as much detail as he could remember. He described noticing the guard, thinking he might be distracted, and making the decision to act. The words tumbled out quickly, almost in a rush, as if confessing might somehow lighten the weight of his guilt. The other trainees followed, each recounting their own perspective. Their voices were nervous, and sometimes they stumbled over words. It was clear that none of them had considered the consequences fully before acting. They had believed that taking immediate action was the right thing to do. They had acted with courage, yes, but without wisdom or understanding. The senior officer listened to every word with patience. He did not interrupt or show anger. Instead, he nodded occasionally, acknowledging their honesty. When everyone had finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and clasped his hands together. "I see," he said slowly. "You were trying to do your duty, but duty without understanding is dangerous. Authority without respect is incomplete. You did not harm the guard, but you showed a lack of judgment. That is the lesson you must learn today." Alex and the others exchanged nervous glances. They had expected punishment, perhaps even a reprimand, but not this quiet, piercing lecture. The officer's words were firm, yet they carried an unexpected weight. It was not about punishment. It was about understanding, reflection, and growth. The officer continued. "The royal guard you handcuffed this morning is more than a person standing at a gate. He represents centuries of tradition, discipline, and honor. Every movement he makes, every gesture has been trained for years. You acted impulsively, thinking you were correcting a mistake, but you were unaware of the significance of your actions. Imagine if a tourist had done the same thing, or if someone with ill intentions had created a distraction. Your lack of understanding could have caused chaos." The trainees listened intently, realizing that the officer's words were not meant to intimidate, but to educate. They felt the truth in his statements. They had approached the situation with the mindset of rookies who wanted to prove themselves, rather than learners who needed to observe and understand first. Their intentions had been good, but good intentions alone were not enough. The officer paused, giving them a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation. "I will not punish you severely this time," he said. "Instead, you will learn from this incident. You will spend the next week observing the guards, understanding their routines, and learning why each action matters. You will report back with your reflections. Only then will you truly understand the responsibility you carry as part of this team." Relief washed over the trainees, mixed with a renewed sense of determination. They were not being humiliated or dismissed. They were being given a chance to learn, to grow, and to correct their mistake. Alex felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this incident, though embarrassing, could become the most valuable lesson of his early career. Over the next few days, the trainees dedicated themselves to observation. They arrived early each morning, taking careful notes, watching the royal guards as they performed their duties with precision and care. They noticed small details they had never appreciated before. The way the guards maintained perfect posture, even when standing for hours. The subtle movements of their eyes, scanning the environment without making it obvious. The disciplined rhythm of their steps, coordinated. Like a well-rehearsed dance. One trainee, Mia, remarked quietly to Alex during a break, "I never realized how much thought goes into every action. It's not just standing at a post. It's about discipline, respect, and presence." Alex nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Each day, the trainees began to see that the guards were not just enforcers of rules, but symbols of dedication, responsibility, and tradition. The trainees also observed the interactions between the guards and the public. They noticed how the guards remained calm, even when faced with distractions or curious onlookers. A child once ran too close to a guard during a ceremonial march, and instead of reacting with anger, the guard maintained composure, gently redirecting the child with a calm gesture. The trainees realized that true authority did not need to be enforced with aggression. It came from respect, experience, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. By midweek, the trainees began to reflect on their own actions. They wrote detailed reports, describing what they had observed and what lessons they had learned. Alex's report was honest and thoughtful. He admitted his impulsiveness, his failure to understand the significance of the guard's role, and his newfound respect for the discipline required in such a position. Writing the report was not easy. It forced him to confront his mistakes fully. Yet it also gave him a sense of closure, a way to channel embarrassment into meaningful insight. During this time, the senior officer visited the trainees regularly, checking their progress, asking questions, and providing guidance. He encouraged them to ask questions, to observe closely, and to think critically about every detail. Observation is as important as action, he told them. You cannot act wisely without understanding the system, the people, and the purpose behind every routine. Today's mistake will shape the way you serve tomorrow. As the week drew to a close, the trainees began to notice changes in themselves. They were more patient, more attentive, and more aware of the subtleties of protocol. They had learned to balance vigilance with respect, to act with both courage and understanding. They no longer rushed to judgment, but instead paused to observe, assess, and make informed decisions. The incident at the palace, once a source of fear and embarrassment, had become a foundation for growth and maturity. Finally, the day arrived when the trainees were to present their reflections to the senior officer. The room was filled with a quiet anticipation. Each trainee spoke in turn, sharing their observations, insights, and personal lessons. Alex spoke with honesty, admitting the impulsiveness that had led to the incident and expressing his newfound respect for the royal guards. Mia described the importance of composure and patience, while others highlighted the significance of tradition and discipline. The officer listened carefully, nodding at each reflection. When all had spoken, he leaned back in his chair and smiled slightly. "You have learned well," he said. "Mistakes are inevitable, but what matters is how you respond to them. Today, you have demonstrated growth, understanding, and the ability to learn. Remember this lesson always, for it will guide you throughout your career." The trainees left the room feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment. They had faced embarrassment, uncertainty, and self-doubt, but through observation, reflection, and guidance, they had turned a mistake into a valuable lesson. Alex felt a deep respect for the royal guard, the senior officer, and the principles they represented. He understood now that authority was not simply about power, but about responsibility, respect, and discipline. As they walked through the palace courtyard one last time that week, the trainees noticed the guard they had handcuffed standing at his post. This time, there was no panic, no tension, only calm presence and quiet authority. The guard gave them a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of their effort and growth. Alex returned the nod, feeling a profound sense of respect and understanding. He knew that he would never forget this lesson, and that it would shape the way he approached every decision in the future. The incident that had begun with confusion and impulsiveness had transformed into a story of growth, reflection, and respect. For the trainees, it was a reminder that learning often comes from mistakes, and that true understanding requires patience, observation, and humility. The Royal Guard had unwittingly become their teacher, and the senior officer had guided them to recognize the importance of discipline and respect. By the end of the week, the trainees had not only learned about protocol and duty, but they had also learned about themselves, their limitations, their potential, and the kind of professionals they aspired to become. The lessons of that week would remain with them forever, shaping their actions, decisions, and character for years to come. And as they continued their training, the memory of the handcuffed royal guard served as a quiet but powerful reminder. True authority is earned through discipline, respect, and understanding, and every action carries a weight that must be recognized and honored. The week of observation had changed the trainees. They arrived at the palace the following Monday with a sense of humility and readiness that was entirely new to them. Gone was the nervousness that had gripped them during the handcuff incident. In its place was a quiet determination to absorb everything they could from the experienced personnel around them. They knew now that every detail mattered, every action carried meaning, and every decision reflected not only on themselves, but on the institution they were training to serve. On this day, the trainees were summoned to a formal meeting in one of the palace's grand rooms, a space they had rarely entered before. The room was impressive in its elegance. Tall windows draped with heavy curtains, polished wooden floors that reflected the morning light, and walls adorned with portraits of high-ranking officers and royal ceremonies. It was a place where history and discipline coexisted, and the atmosphere carried the weight of responsibility. At the head of the room stood a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. He was the colonel, a figure of respect and authority, known throughout the palace for his experience, discipline, and wisdom. His uniform was impeccable, adorned with medals that told stories of decades of service. The trainees could feel the weight of his gaze even before he spoke, as if every action they had taken in the past week were being silently assessed. The colonel began speaking, his voice calm yet firm. "I have been informed of the incident that occurred outside the palace," he said. "You handcuffed one of our royal guards. I understand that your intentions were to maintain security, but intentions alone are not enough. You need to understand the meaning behind your actions, the responsibilities you bear, and the lessons you must carry forward." The trainees listened intently. The colonel did not scold or shout. Instead, his words carried authority because they were measured, deliberate, and filled with experience. Alex felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. He had already spent a week observing the guards, learning from their routines, and reflecting on his own mistakes, but he sensed that the colonel would teach them something even more profound. The colonel motioned for them to follow him, and the group moved through the palace corridors to the courtyard. Here, the daily ceremonial drills were underway. Guards moved with precise coordination, their steps echoing across the open space, rifles held perfectly, and expressions steady. The trainees observed silently, feeling the rhythm and discipline of each movement. "This is more than a routine," the colonel said, pointing to the guards. "Every step you see, every gesture, every pause has a purpose. It is the embodiment of discipline, responsibility, and respect for the institution you serve. A mistake here is not just a minor error, it can undermine centuries of tradition." He stopped near one of the guards and gestured for the trainees to approach. "Observe closely," he instructed. "Notice the smallest details, the way he adjusts his posture, the way his eyes scan the surroundings, the precision of his steps. This is the result of years of training, patience, and dedication." The trainees leaned in, their eyes following every movement. They began to notice subtleties they had overlooked before. The guard's eyes shifted subtly, scanning for potential threats without disturbing his composure. His hands remained steady, even under the glare of the sun and the watchful eyes of the public. Every movement was intentional, every pause purposeful. The colonel continued, his voice calm but intense. "Authority is not shown through force or haste. It is earned through discipline, respect, and understanding. Courage without wisdom is dangerous. Impulsiveness without awareness is foolish. You acted without full knowledge last week. Today, you will learn the difference." To illustrate his point, the colonel shared a story from his own early career. He spoke of a time when he was a young officer, eager to prove himself, and had made a mistake during a high-profile ceremony. He had acted quickly, thinking he was protecting the institution, but in reality, he had disrupted the event and caused unnecessary panic. It had been a humbling experience, but it taught him that patience, observation, and respect were as important as courage. The trainees listened, captivated by the colonel's story. It was one thing to be told about discipline and responsibility, but it was another to hear a seasoned officer recount his own mistakes and the lessons learned from them. Alex felt a connection to the story, realizing that even the most experienced professionals had faced challenges and grown from them. After the story, the colonel directed the trainees to participate in a controlled exercise. They were to assist in the ceremonial routine under his close supervision. This was not a test of speed or strength, but of observation, patience, and understanding. Each trainee was assigned a position where they could support the guards without interfering with their duties. At first, the trainees struggled. Their movements were hesitant, their timing off. Alex noticed his own hands trembling slightly, a reminder of the nervousness he had felt the week before. The colonel walked among them, providing guidance and subtle corrections. "Notice the rhythm," he said. "Move with purpose, not with haste. Respect the space of others, but remain alert. Every action must have meaning." Slowly, the trainees began to adjust. They learned to synchronize their movements with the guards, to anticipate actions without rushing, and to maintain composure even when distractions occurred. A stray pigeon landed near the ceremonial line, and a child ran too close, yet the trainees remained calm, responding appropriately under the colonel's guidance. They realized that true discipline was not about rigid adherence to instructions alone, but about understanding the environment, the people around them, and the purpose behind every action. As the exercise concluded, the colonel gathered the trainees and spoke again. "What you have learned today is the essence of true authority. It is not measured by the ability to act quickly or to assert control. It is measured by the ability to act wisely, with respect, understanding, and humility. You are responsible not just for yourselves, but for the reputation and trust of this institution." Alex felt a profound shift within himself. The lessons of the past week, combined with the colonel's guidance, had transformed his understanding of duty. He no longer saw authority as a tool for asserting power, but as a responsibility to uphold tradition, maintain respect, and act with integrity. The incident of handcuffing the guard, once a source of shame, now felt like a pivotal moment that had catalyzed his growth. The colonel continued, moving among the trainees, offering individual feedback. To Alex, he said, "You acted with courage, but you lacked understanding. Courage is valuable, but it must be guided by knowledge, observation, and respect." "Never forget that," Alex nodded, committing the words to memory. They were simple, but their meaning was deep and enduring. Mia, another trainee, received guidance on maintaining composure under pressure. The colonel emphasized that outward calm was not passive. It was an active, disciplined choice that reflected inner strength. Each trainee received tailored advice, reinforcing the idea that growth was a personal journey, requiring reflection, humility, and dedication. As the day ended, the trainees reflected on their experiences. They had been humbled, educated, and inspired. The colonel had shown them that mistakes were opportunities for learning, that authority was earned, and that discipline required patience and respect. Alex felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had been challenged, corrected, and guided in ways he could not have anticipated. The experience had not only improved his skills, but had shaped his character. Walking back through the palace corridors, the trainees noticed the royal guard they had handcuffed. This time, there was no tension, no confusion. The guard stood tall and calm, performing his duties with precision. He gave them a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of their growth and effort. The trainees returned the nod with respect and understanding, realizing that the guard had become more than a figure in uniform. He had become a symbol of what they aspired to achieve. The colonel's lessons continued to resonate long after the day ended. Each trainee reflected on the importance of observation, patience, and respect. They understood that every action carried weight, that authority was a responsibility, and that true growth came from learning from mistakes, listening to guidance, and committing to improvement. By the evening, Alex felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. He realized that the handcuff incident, the week of observation, and the colonel's teachings were interconnected threads of a single lesson. Discipline, respect, and understanding were inseparable from courage and action. The memory of the mistake would no longer be a source of shame, but a foundation upon which to build a stronger, wiser, and more capable self. The week with the colonel became a defining moment in the trainees' journey. They returned to their dormitories that night with a sense of accomplishment, reflection, and anticipation for the future. Each one understood that the path to true competence required humility, patience, and the willingness to learn from both success and failure. Alex knew that he had been given a rare opportunity to witness wisdom in action, to learn from experience, and to begin the transformation from a novice to a responsible and disciplined professional. As they settled in for the night, the palace stood quietly in the moonlight. The guards continued their duties, the corridors remained polished and serene, and the air carried the legacy of tradition and dedication. Alex looked out the window, thinking of the colonel, the royal guard, and the lessons of the past week. He understood now that true authority was not about acting quickly or proving oneself, but about understanding, respect, and the wisdom to act rightly in every situation. The colonel's presence and guidance had left an indelible mark on each trainee. The experience had transformed their understanding of responsibility, authority, and duty. They had learned that mistakes, when met with reflection and guidance, could become the most powerful teachers of all. Alex felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that he could approach them with courage, wisdom, and respect, just as the colonel had taught. And so, the trainees left the palace that evening not as the same nervous, impulsive group who had made a mistake, but as individuals shaped by experience, guided by wisdom, and inspired to uphold the highest standards of discipline and respect. The lessons of the colonel would remain with them forever, a constant reminder that true authority is earned through patience, observation, humility, and unwavering dedication. The days following the colonel's lesson were unlike any the trainees had experienced before. Each morning, they arrived at the palace with a sense of purpose that went beyond routine duty. Their previous nervousness had been replaced by a quiet focus. Every movement, every glance, every step was measured and deliberate. They were no longer trainees simply practicing exercises. They were learners striving to embody the discipline, respect, and responsibility that the colonel had impressed upon them. Alex, Mia, and the others began their day by observing the guards, noting small details that they had overlooked before. They watched how the guards maintained composure despite distractions from the crowd, how they held their posture perfectly, and how each minor adjustment in their stance served a purpose. Even the way a guard's eyes moved, scanning for potential issues without alarming the public, was a lesson in subtlety and awareness. These observations had become second nature to the trainees. After the observation period, the colonel instructed them to participate actively in the ceremonial duties. This was the ultimate test, not only of what they had learned, but of how they could apply their lessons in a real-world scenario. They were assigned specific roles that complemented the guards, routines, managing the flow of visitors, monitoring the perimeter discreetly, and assisting in preparations for ceremonial drills. At first, the trainees moved cautiously, aware that any mistake could undo the lessons they had learned. Alex, for example, found himself assigned near the main gate, a position that required constant vigilance. His eyes scanned the crowd, noting any unusual movements, while his body remained calm and relaxed. He remembered the colonel's words, "Authority is not shown through force, it is earned through discipline, respect, and understanding." These words guided him as he carried out his responsibilities, step by careful step. The morning passed without incident, which in itself felt like a small victory. But the real test came later during the ceremonial march. The royal guards began their precise routine, stepping in perfect synchrony, rifles held firmly yet elegantly. The trainees joined in their supportive roles, moving in harmony with the guards. Every step, every gesture was coordinated. The air seemed to hum with discipline and precision. As the trainees moved through their duties, Alex noticed a small crowd gathering near the courtyard. Among them was a young child who had wandered too close to the ceremonial line. Normally, this could have been a moment of panic or abrupt intervention. But Alex remembered the lessons he had learned. Stay calm, observe the situation, and act with purpose. He gently guided the child away from the line, using a soft tone and a reassuring gesture, ensuring the child was safe without causing alarm or embarrassment. The colonel watched closely, his expression unreadable but attentive. Mia faced a similar challenge. A tourist, distracted by the ceremony, was stepping too close to the guards. Instead of panicking or rushing forward, Mia calmly directed the tourist to a safe distance, explaining politely why certain areas were restricted. Her movements were precise, her voice steady, and her demeanor respectful. She realized that true authority was not about commanding fear, but inspiring understanding and compliance through respect and clarity. The rest of the morning continued with various small challenges. A stray animal wandering into the courtyard, a photographer trying to get too close to the ceremonial line, and a sudden gust of wind that threatened to disrupt the flags and banners. Each time, the trainees applied the lessons they had learned from observation and the colonel's guidance. They remained composed, made thoughtful decisions, and acted with both confidence and humility. By midday, the colonel called the trainees together for a brief debrief. The group gathered under the shade of the palace columns, their uniforms crisp, their posture straight, and their expressions focused. The colonel spoke with calm authority, praising their improvements and pointing out subtle areas for refinement. He reminded them that growth was ongoing, that mastery of discipline and responsibility was a lifelong journey, and that every small action contributed to their overall development. After the debrief, the trainees returned to their supportive roles, now more confident and aware. Alex noticed that he could anticipate potential issues before they arose. He could read the crowd's movements, predict distractions, and respond proactively rather than reactively. Mia had developed a similar skill, noticing subtle cues in the guards, routines that allowed her to assist without interference. Together, they began to understand the true meaning of teamwork, responsibility, and respect for hierarchy. As the afternoon progressed, the trainees were given a unique opportunity to interact directly with the royal guard they had handcuffed weeks before. The guard, standing tall and calm, acknowledged them with a subtle nod. There was no tension, no resentment, only a quiet acknowledgement of their growth and effort. Alex felt a surge of respect and gratitude. The guard had become more than a figure in uniform. He had become a symbol of discipline, composure, and the standard to which the trainees aspired. The interaction was brief but profound. The guard did not lecture or criticize. Instead, he allowed his presence to teach through example. He demonstrated how to stand at attention for extended periods without fatigue, how to maintain focus amid distractions, and how to convey authority without aggression. Alex and his fellow trainees watched intently, absorbing every detail, understanding that true mastery came not from words but from observation, reflection, and practice. Later that evening, the trainees gathered in the palace courtyard one final time under the colonel's supervision. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the polished floors and golden gates. The colonel addressed the trainees, his voice steady and measured. You have faced challenges, learned from mistakes, and grown through observation and reflection. Today, you have demonstrated that you understand what it means to serve with discipline, respect, and responsibility. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But remember, this is only the beginning. Every day will present new challenges, and every action will have consequences. True authority is not a destination. It is a continuous journey. Carry these lessons with you, and you will become the officers and leaders this institution expects you to be. The trainees listened, inspired and determined. Alex felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself alone, but in the group as a whole. They had transformed from nervous, impulsive beginners into disciplined, observant, and respectful learners. The colonel's guidance, combined with their own reflection and effort, had shaped them into capable individuals ready to serve with integrity. After the formal conclusion of the day, the trainees walked through the palace corridors, reflecting on their journey. They remembered the handcuff incident that had started it all, the lessons learned from observation, and the colonel's guidance. What had once been a moment of embarrassment and fear had transformed into a foundation for growth, learning, and self-awareness. Alex realized that mistakes, when met with reflection and guidance, could become the most powerful teachers of all. As they left the palace grounds, the trainees felt a sense of completion and fulfillment. They had not only learned practical skills, but had also internalized values that would guide them throughout their careers. Discipline, respect, humility, and responsibility. They understood that true authority came from more than courage. It came from wisdom, observation, and the ability to act with integrity under pressure. That evening, Alex sat quietly in his dormitory, reflecting on the events of the past few weeks. He thought about the royal guard, the colonel, and the lessons that had been imparted not just through words, but through actions, presence, and example. He realized that these lessons would remain with him forever, shaping his decisions, his behavior, and his understanding of duty for years to come. Mia and the other trainees shared similar reflections. They discussed the importance of patience, the value of observing before acting, and the necessity of maintaining composure even in stressful situations. Together, they recognized that growth was a collaborative process, strengthened by guidance, practice, and mutual support. Over time, the trainees' performance improved dramatically. Their confidence grew, not as a result of reckless action, but because of their deep understanding of responsibility, discipline, and respect. Alex found himself applying these lessons beyond the palace grounds, in everyday interactions, in teamwork exercises, and in challenging situations that required thoughtful judgment. The Royal Guard continued to serve as a model of composure and discipline, silently teaching through his presence. The colonel remained a guiding figure, offering advice, insight, and encouragement whenever the trainees faced difficulties. Their journey had been transformed from a simple training exercise into a profound experience that would influence their careers and personal growth for the rest of their lives. In the weeks and months that followed, the trainees often reflected on the handcuff incident that had started it all. What had seemed like a mistake became a defining moment, a catalyst for learning, growth, and transformation. They understood now that every challenge, every error, and every opportunity to observe could teach a lesson far more valuable than immediate success. By the end of their training period, the trainees had achieved a level of competence, discipline, and respect that they had not imagined possible at the beginning. Alex, in particular, felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experience. He had learned that true leadership was not about impulsive action or immediate recognition, but about careful observation, thoughtful response, and unwavering respect for tradition and responsibility. The story of the handcuffed royal guard, the attentive observation, and the colonel's guidance became a lesson not only for the trainees, but for anyone who heard it. It demonstrated that mistakes are not failures. They are opportunities for reflection, learning, and growth. It showed that authority is earned through discipline, respect, and integrity, and that every action, no matter how small, carries meaning and consequence. As the sun set over the palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Alex and his fellow trainees walked with confidence, composure, and understanding. They had faced embarrassment, learned humility, and embraced responsibility. They had witnessed wisdom in action and absorbed lessons that would shape their character forever. And so, the trainees left the palace that day not merely as students, but as individuals transformed by experience, reflection, and guidance. They had learned that true authority is earned, mistakes can teach, and respect, discipline, and responsibility are the foundations of every meaningful action. The journey that began with a simple error had become a profound story of growth, learning, and redemption.